Before time began to flow, before the stars lit their eternal fires, there was only chaos. Not just emptiness, but the very essence of nothingness, a bottomless ocean of formless matter where dreams and reality were woven into an indistinguishable whole. In that primeval silence, where there was neither up nor down, neither light nor dark, the first breath was born. Not a sound, but a vibration, a slight, barely perceptible tremor in an endless inkwell. It was the first awakening, the faint pulse of a nascent consciousness, not yet named, but already aware of its existence. Imagine this abyss. There is no air to breathe, no soil to feel under your feet. There is only a boundless, eternal is, which has not yet become aware of itself. From this primeval mixture, from this living but sleeping matter, the first glimmers began to appear. Like distant, misty stars, ideas, forms, potential flared and died. This was the world before the world, where everything was possible and nothing yet existed. And so, from this primeval, all-encompassing nothingness, where the very concept of before was meaningless, something began to emerge. A force, not yet possessed of reason, but driven by a frantic desire to exist, began to form itself. It was akin to a cry born from silence, an awakening after millennia of sleep that had never begun. In this primeval cradle, where there were no stars to light the way, where there were no gods to guide, where there was not even the concept of way, the first movement was born. It was not a birth as we understand it, but rather an emancipation, a separation from the primordial matter, like a baby who first feels his body separate from the womb of his mother. In this vast, boundless darkness, where time had not yet become a measure and space a cell, something new began to pulsate. Not just matter, but essence. Not just energy, but will. It was the first timid breath of being, a harbinger of all that was to come. And in that primeval, incomprehensible moment, where chaos still reigned supreme, but already felt itself separate, a premonition was born. A premonition of form, a premonition of order, a premonition of life. It was the first, barely perceptible awareness of oneself, which, like ripples on the surface of an eternal lake, began to spread, foreshadowing great changes. Thus began history, where from the abyss of non-existence, from the primeval sleeping chaos, the first timid glimmers of consciousness emerged, preparing for their grandiose awakening. From the primordial abyss, where neither before nor after existed, where chaos itself breathed the invisible breath of being, the first forms began to sprout. It was not a birth, but rather an awakening. The forces that had slumbered in eternal darkness acquired consciousness, as if awakening from a 1,000-year sleep that had never begun. And from this awakening, from this frantic desire to take shape, Uranus appeared. He was the sky, not just a vast dome overhead, but a living, breathing entity, permeated with primordial energy. His gaze, like the cold light of distant stars, pierced the eternal night, and his embrace, boundless, all-consuming, clasped Gaia, the earth. She was the womb, the cradle, the fertile soil from which all things would grow. Their union was a union of opposites, a primordial marriage that predated the very concept of marriage. From this union, from the deep, fruitful bond of heaven and earth, the first children began to be born. Not men, not animals, but titans. 6 sons and 6 daughters, whose names whispered to the wind in ancient gorges, whose strength could shake worlds. Among them was Cronus, the youngest and the mightiest, whose eyes burned with the fierce flame of ambition. But Uranus, the sky, was not a loving father. He was afraid of his children. He saw in them a force that could dethrone him, a power that could eclipse his own greatness. And in his fear, he committed a monstrous act. He imprisoned his children back in the womb of Gaia, in the dark, cramped depths of the earth. He did not let them see the light, did not let them breathe the air, did not let them feel themselves. Gaia suffered. Her body, the womb of all that exists, was torn apart from within. Her children, her flesh and blood, were prisoners in her womb. Groans of pain and despair burst forth from her depths, merging with the cold, indifferent breath of Uranus. But even in this hell, in this pitch darkness, Gaia did not lose hope. She forged in her depths a sickle, sharp as thought, from the star metal, a sickle that was to become an instrument of liberation. She turned to her children, to the titans imprisoned in her body, but the fear of Uranus paralyzed them. They trembled, not daring to challenge their despot father. Only Cronos, in whose veins flowed blood burning with the thirst for revenge and the desire for power, responded to her call. In his heart burned hatred for the father who had condemned him to eternal imprisonment, who had trampled on the very idea of existence. And so, when Uranus, as always, bent over Gaia to merge with her in his joyless embrace, Cronos stepped forward. From the depths of the earth, from the womb of his mother, he rose, holding a shining sickle in his hand. His eyes burned with fury, his body was tense like a bowstring. And at the moment when heaven tried to embrace the earth, Cronos struck. It was not just a blow, it was a rift. A blow that broke the primordial bond that separated heaven from earth forever. The blood of Uranus, golden, primordial, spurted in all directions. It fell on Gaia, on her body, on her womb. And there, in that divine blood, mixed with the primordial flesh of earth, something new was born. From the drops of Uranus's blood that fell into the boundless ocean, into the sea foam, she was born. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Her birth was not an act of violence, but an act of creation.
In this primordial foam, in this seething cauldron of divine blood and earthly matter, she found her perfect body, her shining image. And Kronos, he became the new ruler. He overthrew his father, Uranus, and became the ruler of the Titans. But there was a wound in his heart, the wound of his deed, the blood he had spilled. And this wound, like a poisonous root, sprouted doubt and fear. He feared that his children, like himself, would rise up against him. And so began a new cycle of violence, a new round of power struggles that would soon lead to the birth of the next generation of gods. But that is another story. In the meantime, in the seething foam, from the blood of heaven and the womb of earth, a goddess was born who would change the world, filling it with passion, beauty, and eternal love. From the primordial abyss, where neither before nor after existed, where chaos itself breathed the invisible breath of being, the first forms began to sprout. It was not a birth, but rather an awakening. The forces that had slumbered in eternal darkness acquired consciousness, as if awakening from a 1,000-year sleep that had never begun. And from this awakening, from this frantic desire to take shape, Uranus appeared. He was the sky, not just a vast dome overhead, but a living, breathing entity permeated with primordial energy. His gaze, like the cold light of distant stars, pierced the eternal night, and his embrace, boundless, all-consuming, clasped Gaia, the earth. She was the womb, the cradle, the fertile soil from which all things would grow. Their union was a union of opposites, a primordial marriage that predated the very concept of marriage. From this union, from the deep, fruitful bond of heaven and earth, the first children began to be born. Not men, not animals, but Titans. 6 sons and 6 daughters, whose names whispered to the wind in ancient gorges, whose strength could shake worlds. Among them was Kronos, the youngest and the mightiest, whose eyes burned with the fierce flame of ambition. But Uranus, the sky, was not a loving father. He was afraid of his children. He saw in them a force that could dethrone him, a power that could eclipse his own greatness. And in his fear, he committed a monstrous act. He imprisoned his children back in the womb of Gaia, in the dark, cramped depths of the earth. He did not let them see the light, did not let them breathe the air, did not let them feel themselves. Gaia suffered. Her body, the womb of all that exists, was torn apart from within. Her children, her flesh and blood, were prisoners in her womb. Groans of pain and despair burst forth from her depths, merging with the cold, indifferent breath of Uranus. But even in this hell, in this pitch darkness, Gaia did not lose hope. She forged in her depths a sickle, sharp as thought, from the star metal, a sickle that was to become an instrument of liberation. She turned to her children, to the Titans imprisoned in her body, but the fear of Uranus paralyzed them. They trembled, not daring to challenge their despot father.
Only Kronos, in whose veins flowed blood burning with the thirst for revenge and the desire for power, responded to her call. In his heart burned hatred for the father who had condemned him to eternal imprisonment, who had trampled on the very idea of existence. And so, when Uranus, as always, bent over Gaia to merge with her in his joyless embrace, Kronos stepped forward. From the depths of the earth, from the womb of his mother, he rose, holding a shining sickle in his hand. His eyes burned with fury. His body was tense like a bowstring. And at the moment when heaven tried to embrace the earth, Cronus struck. It was not just a blow, it was a rift. A blow that broke the primordial bond that separated heaven from earth forever. The blood of Uranus, golden, primordial, spurted in all directions. It fell on Gaia, on her body, on her womb. And there, in that divine blood, mixed with the primordial flesh of earth, something new was born. From the drops of Uranus's blood that fell into the boundless ocean, into the sea foam, she was born. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Her birth was not an act of violence, but an act of creation. In this primordial foam, in this seething cauldron of divine blood and earthly matter, she found her perfect body, her shining image. And Cronus? He became the new ruler. He overthrew his father, Uranus, and became the ruler of the Titans. But there was a wound in his heart, the wound of his deed, the blood he had spilled. And this wound, like a poisonous root, sprouted doubt and fear. He feared that his children, like himself, would rise up against him. And so began a new cycle of violence, a new round of power struggles that would soon lead to the birth of the next generation of gods. But that is another story. In the meantime, in the seething foam, from the blood of heaven and the womb of earth, a goddess was born who would change the world, filling it with passion, beauty, and eternal love. There came a moment when, from the seething foam born from the wound of the heavens, from the very essence of the primordial blood of Uranus, she emerged, Aphrodite. Not like a warrior entering the battlefield, but like a flower opening at dawn. Her appearance was silent, but no less majestic than the roar of battle. The sea foam, sparkling with millions of tiny diamonds, enveloped her like a delicate veil until she took perfect form. Picture this moment. No sound but the whisper of the waves caressing the shore. No scent but the freshness of the salty breeze and the subtle scent of wildflowers that seemed to bloom from the water itself. Her skin, like polished pearls, radiated a soft inner glow. Her hair, the color of ripe gold, flowed like sunbeams entangled in the surface of the water. Her eyes, the color of the deep sea, held the wisdom of centuries and the tenderness of dawn. It was not just beauty that could be seen, it was beauty that could be felt. It penetrated into the very depths of the soul, awakening long-forgotten strings in it. A light breath of wind touching her seemed to come alive, filled with a melody. The water washing her feet seemed even more gentle, even more pure. From this divine foam, where the blood of heaven and the power of earth were mixed, Aphrodite rose, carrying within her something more than just a form.
She carried within her the essence of desire, the pulse of passion, the quiet call of attraction. It was the birth not only of a goddess, but of the very idea of love, not yet burdened by human passions, still pure and primordial. She was absolute perfection, the embodiment of harmony. Her existence was a response to the quiet but persistent call of existence, which demanded in its life not only strength and power, but also tenderness, attraction, that invisible thread that connects all living things. At that moment, when the world was just taking shape, when the Titans ruled the earth, the birth of Aphrodite became the harbinger of a new era. An era where strength would be combined with beauty, where power would give way to passion, where even the harshest hearts would find room for tenderness. Her appearance was a promise. A promise that in this world, born of struggle and blood, there would be room for light, for warmth, for that inexpressible joy that true love brings. And this foam, which became her cradle, forever preserved the echo of her birth, the whisper of eternal beauty, the pulse of endless passion. From the primordial abyss, where neither before nor after existed, where chaos itself breathed the invisible breath of being, the first forms began to sprout. It was not a birth, but rather an awakening. The forces that had slumbered in eternal darkness acquired consciousness, as if awakening from a 1,000-year sleep that had never begun. And from this awakening, from this frantic desire to take shape, Uranus appeared. He was the sky, not just a vast dome overhead, but a living, breathing entity permeated with primordial energy. His gaze, like the cold light of distant stars, pierced the eternal night, and his embrace, boundless, all-consuming, clasped Gaia, the earth. She was the womb, the cradle, the fertile soil from which all things would grow. Their union was a union of opposites, a primordial marriage that predated the very concept of marriage. From this union, from the deep, fruitful bond of heaven and earth, the first children began to be born. Not men, not animals, but Titans. 6 sons and 6 daughters, whose names whispered to the wind in ancient gorges, whose strength could shake worlds. Among them was Kronos, the youngest and the mightiest, whose eyes burned with the fierce flame of ambition. But Uranus, the sky, was not a loving father. He was afraid of his children. He saw in them a force that could dethrone him, a power that could eclipse his own greatness. And in his fear, he committed a monstrous act. He imprisoned his children back in the womb of Gaia, in the dark, cramped depths of the earth. He did not let them see the light, did not let them breathe the air, did not let them feel themselves. Gaia suffered. Her body, the womb of all that exists, torn apart from within. Her children, her flesh and blood, were prisoners in her womb. Groans of pain and despair burst forth from her depths, merging with the cold, indifferent breath of Uranus. But even in this hell, in this pitch darkness, Gaia did not lose hope. She forged in her depths a sickle sharp as thought from the star metal, a sickle that was to become an instrument of liberation. She turned to her children, to the titans imprisoned in her body. But the fear of Uranus paralyzed them. They trembled, not daring to challenge their despot father. Only Cronus, in whose veins flowed blood burning with the thirst for revenge and the desire for power, responded to her call. In his heart burned hatred for the father who had condemned him to eternal imprisonment, who had trampled on the very idea of existence. And so, when Uranus, as always, bent over Gaia to merge with her in his joyless embrace, Cronus stepped forward. From the depths of the earth, from the womb of his mother, he rose, holding a shining sickle in his hand. His eyes burned with fury. His body was tense like a bowstring. And at the moment when heaven tried to embrace the earth, Cronos struck. It was not just a blow, it was a rift. A blow that broke the primordial bond, that separated heaven from earth forever. The blood of Uranus, golden, primordial, spurted in all directions. It fell on Gaia, on her body, on her womb. And there, in that divine blood, mixed with the primordial flesh of earth, something new was born. From the drops of Uranus blood that fell into the boundless ocean, into the sea foam, she was born. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Her birth was not an act of violence, but an act of creation. In this primordial foam, in this seething cauldron of divine blood and earthly matter, she found her perfect body, her shining image. And Cronos? He became the new ruler. He overthrew his father, Uranus, and became the ruler of the Titans. But there was a wound in his heart, the wound of his deed, the blood he had spilled. And this wound, like a poisonous root, sprouted doubt and fear. He feared that his children, like himself, would rise up against him. And so began a new cycle of violence, a new round of power struggles that would soon lead to the birth of the next generation of gods. But that is another story. In the meantime, in the seething foam, from the blood of heaven and the womb of earth, a goddess was born who would change the world, filling it with passion, beauty, and eternal love. There came a moment when, from the seething foam, born from the wound of the heavens, from the very essence of the primordial blood of Uranus, she emerged, Aphrodite. Not like a warrior entering the battlefield, but like a flower opening at dawn. Her appearance was silent, but no less majestic than the roar of battle. The sea foam, sparkling with millions of tiny diamonds, enveloped her like a delicate veil until she took perfect form. Picture this moment. No sound but the whisper of the waves caressing the shore. No scent but the freshness of the salty breeze and the subtle scent of wildflowers that seemed to bloom from the water itself. Her skin, like polished pearls, radiated a soft inner glow. Her hair, the color of ripe gold, flowed like sunbeams entangled in the surface of the water. Her eyes, the color of the deep sea, held the wisdom of centuries and the tenderness of dawn. It was not just beauty that could be seen, it was beauty that could be felt. It penetrated into the very depths of the soul, awakening long-forgotten strings in it. A light breath of wind touching her seemed to come alive, filled with a melody. The water washing her feet seemed even more gentle, even more pure. From this divine foam, where the blood of heaven and the power of earth were mixed, Aphrodite rose, carrying within her something more than just a form. She carried within her the essence of desire, the pulse of passion, the quiet call of attraction. It was the birth not only of a goddess, but of the very idea of love. Not yet burdened by human passions, still pure and primordial. She was absolute perfection, the embodiment of harmony. Her existence was a response to the quiet but persistent call of existence, which demanded in its life not only strength and power, but also tenderness, attraction, that invisible thread that connects all living things. At that moment, when the world was just taking shape, when the Titans ruled the earth, the birth of Aphrodite became the harbinger of a new era. An era where strength would be combined with beauty, where power would give way to passion, where even the harshest hearts would find room for tenderness. Her appearance was a promise that in this world born of struggle and blood, there would be room for light, for warmth, for that inexpressible joy that true love brings. And this foam, which became her cradle, forever preserved the echo of her birth, the whisper of eternal beauty, the pulse of endless passion. A gentle breath of sea breeze caressing the golden strands of her hair brought with it the scent of myrtle and roses, as if the flowers themselves had blossomed in the boundless blue. Her feet, gently touching the cool, damp surface, carried her away from the cradle of sea foam that still held the echo of the primordial creation. Aphrodite, goddess born from the very essence of desire and beauty, found herself on the bosom of the waves, which became her first trembling path. The ocean, which had recently been the site of her miraculous appearance, now served her as a gentle but powerful carrier. The waters, once seething with divine blood, now carried her with a grace inaccessible to mortal vessels. Emerald waves, like living creatures, picked her up, lulling her, whispering ancient secrets of the depths. Sunlight, refracting through the thickness of the water, drew patterns of gold and azure on her skin, playing with the soft radiance emanating from her. Her path led her to the sacred shores of Cyprus, an island that, by the will of fate itself, was to become her first refuge on earth. It was not a journey as we understand it, not a search, not an escape. It was rather a natural attraction, a call of the earth, thirsting for her presence. Every wave crest, every splash that touched her face seemed to whisper to her, "You are home." As the outlines of the island began to emerge through the light haze of sea fog, Aphrodite's heart, if that's what you can call this pulsating center of divine energy, was filled with a new, previously unknown feeling. It was not excitement or fear, but rather a deep, quiet anticipation, like that which the earth experiences before the coming of spring. She saw the cliffs rising above the water, heard the cries of seagulls carried on the wind, smelled the scent of sun-warmed grasses coming from the shore. Her arrival was as graceful as her birth, The wave that carried her gently laid her on the sandy shore, like a precious pearl laid on velvet. The sand, warm from the sun, caressed her feet, awakening in her the sensation of earth, solid and reliable, different from the eternal movement of the waters. She inhaled deeply the air, rich with the scents of salt, flowers, and spices, the air that was filled with life, so different from the silence of the primordial foam. She stood on the shore, and the world around her seemed to freeze. The waves reaching her calmed down as if bowing before her divine beauty. The wind, which had died down for a moment, came to life again, but now its whisper was full of tenderness, as if it were trying to decorate her hair with even more subtle aromas. Cypress greeted her with silence, but this silence was full of expectation. The earth seemed to sense her presence, to breathe in unison with her. Aphrodite, setting foot on solid ground for the first time, felt a connection, deep and unbreakable, with this world, which she was to fill with her power. This was the beginning of a path that would lead her to the gods of Olympus, but first to the first trembling understanding of the power that now lived within her, the power that was the very essence of life, love, and beauty. On the shores of Cyprus, where the golden sand caressed the feet of the newborn goddess, the world stood still, holding its breath. The sea foam, her cradle, had dissipated, leaving only a light, salty scent and the whisper of the waves, which seemed to sing her a lullaby. Aphrodite, woven from the very essence of desire and beauty, stood on the earth, feeling its solidity under her feet for the first time. Her skin, like mother of pearl, shimmered in the rays of the rising sun, and her golden hair flowed like sunny rivers, washed by a gentle wind that had not yet known storms. At that moment, when the world was just beginning to realize its existence, when the mighty Titans ruled over the still unformed chaos, something happened that changed its nature forever. From the depths of existence, from the very core of primordial matter, they emerged, the Horai, goddesses of the seasons, guardians of harmony and order. 3 sisters, each of whom embodied her own unique essence. Irene, peace and tranquility; Dike, justice and truth; and Eumonia, well-being and prosperity. They came not as conquerors, but as greeters, as guardians of ancient traditions whose task it was to welcome and instruct. Their steps were light as falling petals, their voices as melodious as the murmur of streams. They approached Aphrodite, and in their eyes, the color of the spring sky, one could read not only reverence, but also deep, ancient knowledge. "We greet you, child of foam and blood, child of heaven and earth," Irene's voice rang out, filled with the calm of a summer's day. "We are the Horai, daughters of Zeus and Themis, and we have come to give you the honors that are yours." Dike, with her stern but fair gaze, added, "Your power, Aphrodite, is the power of attraction, the power that binds all things together. It can be both constructive and destructive, and we are here to remind you of its greatness and responsibility."
Eumonia, whose smile resembled the first rays of the spring sun, extended her hands to Aphrodite, adorned with flowers that bloomed right in her palms. "We have brought you gifts so that your stay on earth will be filled with beauty and joy. May your beauty inspire, your love heal, and your presence bring well-being." And so the sacred ritual began. The Horae, like skilled artists, began to adorn Aphrodite. Irene wove her a wreath of delicate, unblown rosebuds, whose petals held the dew of the first morning hours. Dike dressed her in a light, flowing tunic, woven from moonlight and the silk of the sea waves, a tunic that emphasized her perfect form without hiding it. Eumonia strewed her with violet and myrtle petals, filling the air around her with a delicate, intoxicating aroma. Aphrodite, standing at the center of this divine worship, felt her being filled with a new power. It was not the primordial, raging energy that had given birth to her, but a more subtle, harmonious power. A power that knew how to control desires, how to direct passions, how to weave destinies. She saw in the eyes of the oars a reflection of her own greatness, but also an understanding that true power is not only power, but also responsibility. When the ritual was complete, Aphrodite stood before the world in all her pristine beauty, adorned with the gifts of nature and the wisdom of the goddesses. She was the embodiment of spring, a symbol of new life, a promise of love that was about to blossom upon the earth. The oars bowed before her in deepest reverence, recognizing her integral role in the grand design of the universe. There was a quiet but profound solemnity to the moment. It was not a simple greeting, but a recognition of the power that carries tenderness and passion, and that invisible thread that binds all life. Aphrodite, now full and adorned, was ready for her next step, to bring her gift to the world, a world that now seemed even more beautiful and full of promise. Aphrodite, adorned with the gifts of the Horus, stepped on to the shores of Cyprus, and the world around her seemed to come alive with renewed vigor. The sun, which had once simply shone, now spread like golden honey over her skin, warming every cell of her divine being. The air, filled with the scents of myrtle and wild roses, became even thicker, even sweeter, as if the air itself were inhaling her beauty. The ground beneath her feet, which had recently seemed simply solid, now breathed life, pulsating with hidden energy, responding to her invisible presence. She stood there, surrounded by a quiet, respectful aura, and for the first time her gaze fell upon creatures whose lives were limited by time, whose hearts beat in the rhythm of mortal hours. They were they. They had come to the shore, drawn by an unknown force that emanated from her like moths drawn to a light. There were only a few of them, a shepherd whose clothes were rough but whose eyes shone with curiosity, a young girl whose braid was decorated with wildflowers, and an old man whose face was as wrinkled as an ancient map. Their eyes reflected something new for Aphrodite, a mixture of admiration, awe, and something else, deeper, more complex.
It was not just worship of the divine, it was the awakening of something within themselves. The shepherd's gaze lingered on her slender legs, on the soft curve of her hip, and a spark flashed in it, a spark of desire, not yet conscious, but already perceptible. The girl, seeing her perfect beauty, felt a slight tingle of jealousy mixed with admiration. Her own heart beat a little faster, sensing an involuntary comparison.
The old man, wise and having seen much, looked at her with quiet sadness, understanding the fragility and fleetingness of the beauty that was given to her, but also the inevitability of the power that she carried within herself. And then Aphrodite felt it, something within her that had lain dormant in the foam, that had been awakened by the oars, now began to pulse with renewed vigor. It was not simply an awareness of her beauty, but an understanding of its influence. Her gaze, like a ray of sunlight falling upon the earth, awakened in these mortals what had lain hidden for centuries beneath the veil of everyday life. She saw their souls, like flowers, open under her touch, their hearts begin to beat in a different rhythm, anticipating what was to come. It was not violence, not coercion. It was a natural flow, a law of nature that now acquired a divine embodiment. Aphrodite understood that her destiny was not only to be an object of admiration, but also to be a catalyst. A catalyst for the feelings that make mortal life so vibrant, so passionate, so full of meaning despite its finitude. She saw the shepherd, emboldened, hold out a flower to her, a modest but sincere gift. The girl, overcoming her embarrassment, also bowed, offering her a handful of wild berries. Even the old man, smiling, nodded to her, expressing his silent recognition. In these simple gestures, in these timid offerings, Aphrodite saw a reflection of her power. A power that does not require weapons or power, but which is capable of uniting, inspiring, and transforming. It was the first awakening, the first awareness of how her existence affected the world, how her beauty stirred hidden desires, how her presence made hearts beat faster. She understood that her place was not only among the gods, but among those who seek love, who seek intimacy, who yearn for that spark that makes life truly alive. And in this first, timid interaction with the mortal world, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, felt the true pulse of her power, the beginning of her eternal influence. On the shores of Cyprus, where the golden sand caressed the feet of the newborn goddess, the world around her seemed to freeze, holding its breath. The sea foam, her cradle, had dissipated, leaving only a light, salty scent and the whisper of the waves, which seemed to sing her a lullaby. Aphrodite, woven from the very essence of desire and beauty, stood on the earth, feeling its solidity under her feet for the first time. Her skin, like mother of pearl, shimmered in the rays of the rising sun, and her golden hair flowed like sunny rivers, washed by a gentle wind that had not yet known storms. She saw mortals gathered on the shore, drawn by her radiance. Their eyes were filled with wonder, awe, and a sense of awakening, a premonition of what she would bring to their world.
Her gaze, like a ray of sunlight falling on the earth, awakened in them something that had lain hidden for centuries beneath the surface of everyday life. It was a natural flow, a law of nature that had now taken on a divine form. She knew that her place was not only with the gods, but with those who seek love, who seek intimacy, who yearn for that spark that makes life truly alive. It was at that moment when Aphrodite, feeling the power of her influence over mortals, began to comprehend her role in this nascent world, that a call came from the heavens. It was not a loud, commanding cry, but a deep, resonant voice, penetrating the air, the earth, and right into her divine being. A voice she would have recognized anywhere, the voice of Zeus, king of the gods. "Aphrodite, child of foam and blood, come to Olympus," came the call, filled with majestic power, but devoid of threat. It was not a command, but an invitation to the very heart of the divine pantheon. As if obeying an invisible force, Aphrodite turned to the heavens. She did not yet know what awaited her, but she felt that this call was an important turning point in her destiny. Leaving behind the shores of Cyprus, where the Horai had welcomed her, and where her power had first awakened, she rushed upward towards the call. The journey to Olympus was not a simple flight. It was an ascent through layers of existence, through the curtains that separated the mortal world from the divine. The air became thinner and thinner, but at the same time filled with the radiance that emanated from the mountain itself. With each flap of invisible wings, Aphrodite felt her own being becoming lighter, purer, more attuned to the atmosphere that reigned among the immortals. As she approached the summit, a majestic view opened up before her. Not clouds, but shining crystalline structures seemed to frame the abode of the gods. Palaces built of sunlight and stardust rose above the clouds, their peaks lost in a radiance that could not be described by mortal language. It was a world where time flowed differently, where passions were more vivid and powers were boundless. Zeus, seated on his throne of lightning, met her with a look full of ancient wisdom and undeniable power. His beard, like a silver waterfall, fell down to his chest, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, radiated a power capable of controlling the entire being. Next to him, in an aura of calm and nobility, stood Hera, the queen of the gods, her gaze full of dignity, but also a certain hidden tension. The other Olympians were there too, each in his own glory. Poseidon, with his trident that radiated the power of the deep sea. Hades, whose shadow seemed thicker than the others, his kingdom underground, but his presence was felt here. Apollo, shining like the sun itself, with his lyre in his hand. Artemis, with her bow and arrow, the embodiment of the wild nature. Ares, the embodiment of war, with his stern, warlike appearance. Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge, with his calloused hands and piercing gaze, and others whose names were synonymous with great forces of nature and human destinies. Zeus nodded to Aphrodite, a gesture of welcome and recognition. "Welcome to Olympus, child of foam." His voice rang out, filled with paternal warmth, but also with a hint that her presence here was no accident. You were born of blood and foam, of passion and desire, and now your place is among us, the great and the eternal. He pointed to the empty seat next to Hephaestus, the blacksmith god whose appearance was far from perfect, but whose strength and skill were undeniable. "You will be Hephaestus's wife," Zeus declared, and there was no room for doubt in his words. "It is a union that will benefit us all. Hephaestus is a craftsman whose works strengthen our world, and your beauty and influence will bring harmony to his passionate heart." Aphrodite looked at Hephaestus. His face was stern, but deep in his eyes she saw something else, a spark that ignited at her presence, like a forge fire ignited by the touch of air. It was not the flame of passion she felt when meeting mortals, but rather a quiet but powerful attraction, based on respect and perhaps an unspoken admiration. She felt the eyes of the other gods. Eris, the god of war, looked at her with a challenge, his eyes alight with undisguised interest that hinted at anticipation. Hera, though welcoming, had a wary look in her eyes, for she knew how the power of beauty and love could shake even the strongest alliances. But Zeus seemed oblivious to these subtle nuances. To him, it was a logical step, a way to integrate a new, powerful force into the existing order. "Your role on Olympus will be great, Aphrodite," he continued. "You will bring beauty to our halls, awakening the emotions that make the lives of gods and mortals complete. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility." Aphrodite nodded, accepting her new position. She knew that this place was not only a symbol of power, but also a battlefield where intrigues were woven, where passions ran higher than in the mortal world, and where her own strength would be tested. She was ready. For passion, struggle, and unquenchable desire were what she had carried within her since the moment of her birth. And now, among the great gods of Olympus, her story was just beginning, ready to unfold in full, filled with love, beauty, and unforeseen consequences. Her gaze slid over the faces of the gods, and in each she saw a reflection of the power that was now a part of her. In the eyes of Eris, the raging flames of battle. In the eyes of Apollo, the radiance of truth. In the eyes of Hades, the mystery of eternity. But at that moment, her gaze stopped on Hephaestus. In his eyes, despite the roughness of his features, she saw something else, a quiet but steadfast strength, like red-hot metal ready to take any shape. He was her betrothed, her destiny on Olympus. And in that moment, when silence hung in the air, Aphrodite felt how an invisible thread, woven from the will of Zeus and the hidden desire of the god of blacksmiths himself, began to bind their destinies. This union was predetermined, but how it would develop, only time would tell. On the summit of Olympus, where the sunlight seemed thicker and brighter than anywhere else, Zeus, king of the gods, spoke the words that would forever change the fate of the newborn Aphrodite. Her appearance on that sacred mountain peak was like the rising of a new star, illuminating the realm of the immortals. She, a child of foam and blood, born from the wound of Uranus, now stood before those who ruled the world, before the pantheon whose strength could crush mountains and whose will determined the course of the ages. Zeus, in his wisdom and foresight, saw in Aphrodite something more than just beauty. He saw a force that could balance the raging passions of the other gods, a force that could bring harmony and order to their eternal games of power and desire. And so he proposed a union that seemed illogical at first glance, but deep down was full of divine design. Aphrodite, embodiment of love and passion, you have come to us to take your rightful place. His voice rang out, thunderous but not menacing. Your beauty is blinding, your power of attraction undeniable. And so that your power may serve good rather than chaos, we have chosen to bind you to one who best understands creation and transformation. His gaze slid over the faces of the gods, and in each he saw a reflection of the power that was now part of her. In the eyes of Eris, the raging flames of battle. In the eyes of Apollo, the radiance of truth. In the eyes of Hades, the mystery of eternity. But at that moment, his gaze stopped on Hephaestus. In his eyes, despite the roughness of his features, he saw something else. A quiet but steadfast strength, like red-hot metal ready to take any shape. He was her betrothed, her destiny on Olympus. And in that moment, when silence hung in the air, Aphrodite felt how an invisible thread, woven from the will of Zeus and the hidden desire of the god of blacksmiths himself, began to bind their destinies. This union was predetermined, but how it would develop, only time would tell. On the summit of Olympus, where the sunlight seemed thicker and brighter than anywhere else, Zeus, king of the gods, spoke the words that would forever change the fate of the newborn Aphrodite. Her appearance on that sacred mountain peak was like the rising of a new star, illuminating the realm of the immortals. She, a child of foam and blood, born from the wound of Uranus, now stood before those who ruled the world, before the pantheon whose strength could crush mountains and whose will determined the course of the ages. Zeus, in his wisdom and foresight, saw in Aphrodite something more than just beauty. He saw a force that could balance the raging passions of the other gods, a force that could bring harmony and order to their eternal games of power and desire. And so he proposed a union that seemed illogical at first glance, but deep down was full of divine design. Aphrodite, embodiment of love and passion, you have come to us to take your rightful place, his voice rang out, thunderous but not menacing. Your beauty is blinding, your power of attraction undeniable. And so that your power may serve good rather than chaos, we have chosen to bind you to one who best understands creation and transformation. He pointed to Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, whose hands were calloused with toil, whose body bore the marks of endless hours spent at the forge. Hephaestus, who despite his limp and stern appearance, was the most skilled craftsman among the gods, the creator of Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Eris's shining armor. His workshop, hidden in the depths of a volcano, was where perfection was born from the chaos of fire and metal. "You will be Hephaestus's wife," Zeus declared, and there was no room for doubt in his words. He is the master whose works strengthen our world, and your beauty and influence will bring harmony to his passionate heart. His work is creation. Your gift is the awakening of life. Together, you will be the pillars of our kingdom, a symbol that harmony can be born even in the most disparate beings. Aphrodite looked at Hephaestus. His eyes, the color of molten gold, met hers, the color of the deep sea. There was no Erishan fire in them, no temptation, but something else, a deep, unspoken admiration, mixed with respect for her divine essence. She felt something new, quiet but insistent, beginning to form in his rough but strong heart, an attraction different from blind passion, but no less powerful. It was a premonition of a union based not on raging flames, but on smoldering embers, capable of flaring into something beautiful and lasting. As Aphrodite felt this budding feeling, her gaze was drawn involuntarily to another god, Eris, the god of war, whose beauty was stern and predatory, whose eyes burned with undisguised interest, met her gaze with a challenge. There was anticipation in his gaze, something more passionate and dangerous than Hephaestus's quiet respect. It was a flame that Aphrodite knew and understood, a flame that could either warm or burn to ashes. Hera, queen of the gods, watched the scene with a certain hidden wariness. She knew the power of Aphrodite, how easily that power could destroy the strongest bonds. Her own marriage to Zeus had been full of trials, and she sensed that Aphrodite's arrival would bring new, even greater challenges. Aphrodite, aware of the many eyes on her, accepted Zeus's decision. A union with Hephaestus was not a choice, but a destiny. But in this destiny, she saw not an end, but a new beginning. She sensed that even in this seemingly uneven union, there was potential for something amazing. Her beauty, her influence, these were tools she could control. She could awaken in Hephaestus not only a master, but a man capable of deep emotion. And his craftsmanship, his power to create, could become the basis for something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. Aphrodite's quiet assent hung in the air like the fragrance of rare flowers. Hephaestus, sensing the answer, bowed his head, and in his eyes there was a light she had not seen before, a light of hope. This was not a triumph, but the beginning of a long journey, where passion and art, beauty and skill would be woven into one. The tension in the air did not disappear, it only changed its form, turning from a premonition of battle to an expectation of the unknown. The union was made, but the true story of love and the passion born from it was only beginning, hiding both light and shadow. The bonds woven on Olympus were thinner than the webs of divine intent. Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus, whose hands had known only the heat of the forge and the ringing of the hammer, found herself in a world where another, subtler but far more powerful force reigned. Her beauty, like sunlight, penetrated cold metal and rough skin, but in Hephaestus's heart it awakened not a raging passion, but rather a timid, respectful admiration. He saw in her not only a goddess, but also an ideal, a creation that he himself could not comprehend with his craft. He created beautiful things, but Aphrodite herself was the living embodiment of what even his ingenious hands could not achieve. And in her soul, woven from the silk of sea foam and the gold of the sun's rays, something else was awakening. Hephaestus's tenderness was like a quiet stream that gently flowed around the rocks, but could not quench the thirst for passion raging in her divine blood. She felt the pulse of life that had been beating in her since birth, that primordial call that connected all that exists. And this call, quiet but inexorable, whispered to her about something else. Her gaze, full of unspoken longing, often rested on Ares, the god of war, whose beauty was like the sharp edge of a sword, whose eyes burned with the flames of battle and frantic desire. He was the complete opposite of Hephaestus, the embodiment of wild, unbridled strength, the very element that found a response in the depths of Aphrodite's soul. Their meetings were secret, hidden from the all-seeing eye of Zeus and the jealous gaze of Hera. They took place in secluded groves, where the whisper of leaves muffled the beating of hearts, or on deserted beaches, where only the moon became a witness to their trysts. Eris, like a predator scenting its prey, was skilled in the art of seduction. He did not seek power or respect. His only goal was to feel the tremors of her divine body, to hear her sighs, to lose himself in her beauty. He saw her not just as a lover, but as a challenge, someone who could calm his rage, someone who could awaken in him feelings beyond battle and destruction. Their passion was like a fire in dry grass. It was all-consuming, dangerous, but so desirable. Aphrodite, who for the first time knew the fullness of desire, responded to him with the same force. In these secret moments, in Ares's arms, she felt truly alive, free from the bonds of marriage, from the conventions of Olympus. She saw how a tender light lit up his eyes, usually full of bloodthirstiness, how his rough hands became surprisingly trembling when they touched her. Their union, born of secret passion, gave birth to a new deity. Not one born of the roar of battle or noble union, but one born from the very essence of desire, from the quiet but irresistible impulses of the heart. This was Eros, the god of love, whose arrows, piercing the hearts of gods and mortals, sowed the seeds of attraction, passion, and sometimes madness. Eros's birth was shrouded in mystery, as was everything about his parents. He did not appear with thunder and lightning, but rather seeped into the world like the scent of blooming jasmine, impossible to contain. He was the embodiment of that spark that ignited hearts, that power that made gods forget their greatness and mortals their fragility. Aphrodite, looking at her son, felt a strange mixture of pride and slight sadness. Pride for having given birth to such a powerful being, capable of controlling the feelings of all living things. Sadness because this gift, this power, born of her secret love for Ares, was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Eros was not only the god of love, but also the god of seduction. a god whose arrows could both unite souls and destroy them. Their secret meetings continued. Their passion only seemed to grow. But in the world of the gods, nothing could remain hidden forever. Rumors like poison ivy began to creep up the pillars of Olympus, reaching the ears of those who did not want to see this relationship. Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus, and Ares, the god of war, whose relationship was as forbidden as it was irresistible. And in this forbidden passion, in these secret meetings, lay not only the reason for the birth of Eros, but also a harbinger of the coming trials that were to befall gods and mortals when the secret was revealed. Rumors like poisonous lashes wove around the marble columns of Olympus, penetrating into the most hidden corners of the palaces, where even the sunlight seemed muted. An invisible thread, woven from the whispers of nymphs, the sighs of satyrs, and the unambiguous glances of the gods themselves, stretched from the secret groves where Ares and Aphrodite shared forbidden passion to the throne room of Zeus. The goddess of love, whose birth had been as stormy as it had been beautiful, now, having tied the knot with the lame Hephaestus, found that her own power, the power meant to give joy and harmony, became a source of temptation as well as blessing. Aphrodite, whose beauty outshone the moon itself, was more than just an object of admiration. She became a magnet to which hearts were drawn. Her presence on Olympus was like inhaling a rare, intoxicating scent. It changed everything around her, awakening dormant desires and revealing hidden passions. And the first to feel this powerful influence were the gods themselves, her new kin. Ares, the god of war, was the first to succumb to her charms. His fiery nature, accustomed to the roar of battle and the thirst for blood, found in Aphrodite a reflection of his own unbridled strength, but tinged with passion and tenderness. Their secret meetings, shrouded in the darkness of the night and the whisper of ancient trees, were like a fire engulfing the vaults of heaven. At these moments, Ares forgot his warlike thoughts. His gaze, usually full of wildness, softened, and his rough hands became surprisingly trembling, caressing her skin, as if wanting to immortalize every touch. The birth of Eros, the god of love, became their secret fruit, a testimony to the fact that even in the wildest passions, something can be born that can control the fate of the world. But Aphrodite's power extended further. Her beauty, like an invisible ray, pierced the hearts of the other Olympians, awakening in them feelings they perhaps had not suspected. Poseidon, the ruler of the seas, whose waters held ancient secrets and raging power, sensed in her a reflection of the storm itself, but a storm tamed and transformed. His gaze, usually focused on the boundless blue, lingered more and more often on her, and in the depths of his sea eyes flickered a longing for what he seemed unable to comprehend, for the tenderness that was inherent in her. Even Apollo, the god of the sun, light, and the arts, whose radiance seemed unwavering, sensed the change. His songs, usually filled with harmony and wisdom, began to take on new, more passionate tones.
He saw in Aphrodite an inspiration, a muse who could awaken in him new melodies, new poems, saturated with the aroma of love and desire. He dedicated hymns to her, singing of her beauty, but in his eyes, hidden under golden strands, there was something more. Awe mixed with an understanding of the power that the goddess carried within herself, a power that could both exalt and cast down. Hephaestus, her lawful husband, suffered in silence. His heart, forged in the fire of the furnace, was incapable of the raging passion that burned in Ares. He loved Aphrodite with his own special, masterful love. A love expressed in exquisite jewelry, in sparkling tiaras, in the finest bracelets that he created for her. He saw her beauty, but he could not fathom its depth. He could not hold her in his rough, calloused hands. His love was like beautiful but cold metal, while Aphrodite's passion was a living, blazing fire. And this difference, this gulf between them, only increased his suffering, making him a prisoner of his own creation. He had created for her a palace full of wonders, but this palace became a cage for her. Even Zeus, the king of the gods, whose power seemed unassailable, was not entirely immune to her influence. He saw her not only as Hephaestus's consort, but also as a force to be controlled. He knew that love and passion were powerful forces, capable of both creation and destruction. And though he himself was subject to his own desires, he understood that too much infatuation with Aphrodite could shake the foundations of Olympus. He watched her with caution, trying to figure out how to direct her power for good rather than destruction. Hera, the queen of the gods, was perhaps the only one who understood the true nature of the danger posed by Aphrodite. Her own marriage to Zeus had been full of trials, and she knew how destructive jealousy could be, and how easily beauty could become a weapon of seduction. She had seen how Aphrodite, even when married to Hephaestus, did not hesitate to show her attraction to others, how her eyes, the color of the deep sea, sought out new objects of passion. Hera, with the insight of centuries, sensed that this goddess born of foam and blood would bring with her not only joy, but also chaos. She had seen how her influence spread like a virus among the gods, how their minds and hearts became increasingly susceptible to her charms. The consequences of this blinding of the gods were far-reaching. Marriages of convenience and duty began to fall apart. The gods, whose souls were filled with pride and power, became prisoners of their own desires, forgetting their duties, their kingdoms, themselves. Aphrodite, without knowing it, became the catalyst for the coming events, the spark that ignited the flame of passion that was to engulf gods and mortals alike. Her beauty, her charm, her power of attraction, all this was not just a gift, but also a test that everyone who crossed her path had to endure. And in this eternal cycle of love, passion, and their consequences, Aphrodite, the child of foam and blood, gained her true, unquenchable power, becoming not just a goddess, but the very essence of what makes life, be it divine or mortal, so bright, so unpredictable, and so infinitely beautiful. In gardens where time flowed differently, where every flower seemed woven from the purest light, and the air was filled with the scent of ambrosia and myrtle, lived Aphrodite.
Her beauty was not merely physical perfection. She was the essence of all that was beautiful, the embodiment of the desire that moved the worlds. But even among the gods, whose lives were eternal and whose passions were boundless, there were those who craved what Olympus could not give. Among them was Adonis. He was not a god, but a mortal whose beauty surpassed that of many immortals. Born of the strange, almost forbidden union of the mortal king Cinyras and his own daughter, Myrrha, Adonis was born the child of a curse and a blessing. His father, succumbing to the passion instilled in him by Aphrodite, encroached on his own daughter. Horrified by what he had done, Myrrha, by the will of the gods, was transformed into a tree, from which, in time, this young prince was born, whose skin was like rose petals and whose hair was like black silk. Aphrodite, whose influence gave birth to this strange story, saw Adonis, and she could not take her eyes off him. She saw in him something she could not find in the eternal but sometimes predictable passions of the Olympians. In his eyes, the color of the spring sky, she saw purity, innocence, and that inexpressible fragility that is inherent in all mortals. He was the embodiment of youth, strength, and natural grace.
His body, slender and strong, seemed to be carved by the hand of a skilled sculptor, and his smile could melt the ice in the heart of the harshest god. She, the goddess whose power aroused passion in all who saw her, was herself a prisoner of the beauty of a mortal youth. It was not a mere attraction, not a passing fancy. It was love, a deep, sincere, all-consuming love that made her forget eternity, her divine duties, herself. She spent days with Adonis that seemed like an eternity, enjoying his company, his laughter, his innocence. They wandered through flowering meadows, listened to the birds singing, admired the play of the sun's rays on the water. Adonis, unaware of the divine origin of his beloved, reciprocated her feelings. He saw in her not just a beautiful woman, but a being whose soul was as beautiful as her appearance. He felt her tenderness, her care, her passion, which seemed to emanate from her like the fragrance of a flower. But even in this paradise of love, there was a shadow of fate that spared neither gods nor mortals. And there was one goddess whose heart was poisoned by jealousy. Hera, the queen of the gods, whose eyes saw everything that happened on Olympus and beyond, could not accept Aphrodite's happiness. She saw how the goddess of love, whose power extended to everyone, was completely consumed by a mortal. It was a humiliation for the divine pantheon, a challenge to the very order of things. Hera, in her anger, turned to her husband Zeus. But Zeus, though king of the gods, could not defy the will of fate. The fate of Adonis was already written. And Hera, in her quest to punish Aphrodite, found another way. She turned to Ares himself, the god of war, whose heart was filled with rage and a thirst for battle. Ares, who himself was secretly attracted to Aphrodite, could not resist Hera's offer. He saw in this not only an opportunity to harm his rival, but also a chance to get closer to the goddess who so beckoned to him.
Ares, armed with his indomitable strength and cunning, took the form of a huge, ferocious boar. He knew that Adonis, despite his beauty, was a passionate hunter, and he waited for the moment when the young man, carried away by the chase, would find himself in a vulnerable position. And that moment came. Adonis, pursuing his prey in the dense forest, did not notice the trick. The boar, sent by Ares, attacked him suddenly. The blow was terrible. The fangs of the beast sank into the body of the young man, causing a mortal wound. Adonis fell. His blood, red and hot, stained the ground. Aphrodite, at the moment it happened, felt a sharp pain, as if her own heart had been torn apart. She felt the life leaving her lover's body, his soul leaving earthly existence. Horrified, she rushed to help, but it was too late. She found Adonis lying in a pool of blood, his eyes already dimmed, and a dying smile frozen on his lips. Aphrodite's grief was immeasurable. She sobbed, her tears like pearls falling on the lifeless body. She wrapped herself around him, whispering words of love that he could no longer hear. Her pain was so strong that it seemed the world itself stood still, listening to her mournful songs. In her grief, she turned to Zeus. She begged him to bring Adonis back to life, to return him to the mortal world. But even the all-powerful Zeus could not change the course of fate. The blood that had been spilled, the fate that had been predetermined, all of this was part of a greater plan that even the gods could not control. However, in his compassion, Zeus offered Aphrodite a consolation. He allowed Adonis to divide his existence between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Adonis was to spend half the year in the kingdom of Hades, among the shadows and oblivion, but the other half he was to return to earth, to the world of light, to his beloved. And so, every year, when spring came, the world came alive. The earth was covered with flowers, the trees blossomed, and Adonis returned from the kingdom of darkness. Aphrodite greeted him with jubilation, her heart filled with joy. They wandered through the gardens again. Their love, tempered by trials, seemed even stronger, even more beautiful. But every time autumn came and Adonis had to return to the kingdom of shadows, grief again overwhelmed Aphrodite. This eternal alternation of joy and sorrow, return and parting, became a symbol of the fragility and beauty of mortal life, and of that all-consuming love that can overcome even death. Adonis, the mortal youth whose beauty became the cause of his death, remained in the memory of the world as a symbol of ideal but tragic love. And Aphrodite, the goddess whose heart was torn apart by grief, continued to bring her power to the world, the power of love, which, even when faced with death itself, did not fade, but only acquired a new, bitter-sweet beauty. Where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of ripe peach and molten gold, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming citrus groves and the cool freshness of sea foam, there lived a sculptor. Not just a craftsman, but a true artist, whose hands seemed to be endowed with a divine gift. His name was Pygmalion, and he was a king among men, but in his heart he strove for a perfection that he believed existed only in his imagination. Pygmalion was disappointed in the women of his time. Their frivolity, their vanity, their thirst for empty pleasures, all this seemed to him far from the ideal that he cherished in his soul. He saw beauty in the curves of marble, in the play of light on a polished surface. But real women, with their imperfections and weaknesses, could not satisfy his demanding taste. He dreamed of one whose soul would be as pure as her appearance, whose virtue would shine brighter than any precious stone, whose devotion would be eternal, like the waves of the sea. And then, in his solitude, in his passionate desire to create something perfect, he turned his gaze to stone. His workshop, located in a secluded corner of the island of Cyprus, where the air was filled with the scent of wild roses and a salty breeze, became the place of his creation. He chose the best marble, snow white as the first snow, with veins reminiscent of the finest veins through which, it seemed, life itself could flow. And he began to create. Every day, from sunrise until late in the evening, Pygmalion worked. His hands, strong and skillful, glided over the cold stone, carving out of it the image born in his dreams. He put all his passion, all his longing, all his hope into this creation. He sculpted the graceful features of the face, giving them an expression of meekness and wisdom. He chiseled the slender body, striving for ideal proportions, for the harmony that delighted him in nature. He created hands that seemed ready for a gentle touch, and legs that seemed eager to dance. Day after day, week after week, a miracle was born from the lifeless stone. A woman, not just a statue, but an image filled with the very beauty and virtue that Pygmalion dreamed of. Her eyes seemed to be able to see the soul, her lips to give a tender word, her body to radiate warmth. He gave her a name, Galatea, a name that sounds like the whisper of a sea wave, like the flutter of a butterfly's wings. When the work was finished, Pygmalion stood before his creation, unable to take his eyes off it. Galatea was perfect. Her beauty was not cold, not distant, but alive, filled with an inner light. He felt his heart, always so reserved, beating in unison with the invisible pulse of the stone. He dressed her in the finest clothes, woven from moonlight and cobwebs, adorned her neck with pearls that seemed to reflect the purity of her soul. He gave her flowers, and they, as if sensing her divine nature, blossomed brighter and more fragrant. He spent hours with her, talking to her, telling her about his dreams, about his life. He knew she couldn't answer, but her stony eyes seemed to reflect understanding, her frozen smile, sympathy. He fell in love with his own creation, with the image he had created himself. It was a love born of loneliness and a passionate thirst for perfection. The festival of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, arrived. Pygmalion, whose heart was filled with love for his Galatea, went to the temple.
He brought her gifts, sacrifices, and, standing before the altar, addressed the goddess with a fervent prayer.
"Oh, great Aphrodite," he begged, his voice shaking with emotion. "You who give love to all things, you whose power awakens hearts, hear me. I have created a woman who is the embodiment of my dream. Her beauty is perfect, her soul is pure, but she is only stone. I ask you, O goddess, to give her life. Give her breath. Give her a heart that can feel. Make her alive so that she can respond to my love." Aphrodite, whose gaze, like a ray of sunshine, penetrated into the depths of hearts, heard his plea. She saw the passion that burned in Pygmalion's heart, saw the sincerity of his desire. She saw how his love, born of art, aspired to what seemed impossible. And the goddess, whose power lay in awakening feelings, decided to answer his request. When Pygmalion returned to his workshop, he could not believe his eyes.
Galatea stood before him, but now her skin seemed soft and warm. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of her breathing, and her eyes, those same stone eyes, now shone with life. She looked at him, and in her gaze he could read surprise, joy, and, most importantly, reciprocated love. "Pygmalion," she whispered, her voice like the soft song of a bird. And then Pygmalion understood. His dream had come true. His art, his passion, his love, all of it had brought the stone to life. Galatea was alive. She was the woman he had been looking for so long, the embodiment of his ideal. Their love was like the dawn after a long, dark night. It was tender, tremulous, full of discoveries. Pygmalion taught Galatea everything he knew about the beauty of the world, about the harmony of nature, about the power of human feelings. Galatea, in turn, filled his life with joy, warmth, and the very love he had dreamed of for so long. They lived happily ever after. Their union was a testament to the fact that true love, born from a pure heart and supported by divine intervention, can overcome any obstacle, even those that seem as insurmountable as a wall of stone. Their story became a legend, a reminder that art inspired by love can work wonders, bringing to life not only stone, but the soul itself. And this was the great lesson taught by Aphrodite. The power of love can transform everything that exists, making it beautiful, alive, and eternal. In the eternal dance of existence, where sunlight intertwined with the shadows of forgotten centuries, a story of love and trials unfolded against the backdrop of majestic Olympus and the mysterious corners of the mortal world. Aphrodite, the goddess born of foam and blood, whose appearance marked a new era of desires and passions, stood on the threshold of a new, even more complex stage of her existence. Her union with Hephaestus, decreed by the will of Zeus, was only a prelude to stories that were to shake the foundations of the divine world. Jealousy, the serpent whose scales glimmered dimly in the depths of the strongest hearts, found its way even to the top of Olympus.
Hera, the queen of the gods, whose wisdom was as profound as her bitterness, saw in Aphrodite not just the consort of Hephaestus, but a temptress capable of destroying the fragile order she so carefully maintained. Eris, the god of war, whose passion for Aphrodite was as wild as his lust for battle, caused their secret meetings, giving birth to Eros, the god of love, whose arrows carried both bliss and destruction. But the true test for Aphrodite was yet to come. It was a story that was to demonstrate that true love is not always born of passion, but often of overcoming, of patience, of deep, sometimes painful knowledge of each other. It was the story of Psyche. Psyche was mortal. But her beauty was so dazzling, so perfect, that people began to worship her as a new Aphrodite. Temples were built in her honor. Statues depicted her divine form. It was an unprecedented blasphemy, a direct attack on the power and status of the goddess of love herself. Aphrodite, accustomed to being the only one whose beauty inspired such admiration, felt a cold, corrosive hatred arise in her divine heart. It was not just jealousy, it was an affront to her very essence. In her anger, Aphrodite called upon her son Eros. "My son," she said, her voice like the rustling of autumn leaves, full of hidden menace. "You, whose arrows make hearts tremble, you, whose power rules the world, do my bidding. Find this mortal Psyche, and make her love the most vile creature, the most worthless being you can find. Let her beauty be marred by a vile love. Let her life be a curse." Eros, the son of passion and desire, could not refuse his mother. He loved her. He depended on her strength, on her influence. But in the depths of his divine essence, he felt another power, the power of sincere love, a power that did not require coercion. His gaze, usually full of playfulness, was now clouded with anxiety. He knew that playing with hearts has its price, and this price can be too high. Submitting to his mother's will, Eros made his way to the mortal realm. He found Psyche surrounded by throngs of adoring admirers. She was as beautiful as a flower opening in the morning sun. Her eyes were pure, her smile was innocent. And as Eros approached to fulfill his mission, he saw his own heart tremble. He raised his bolden bow, but instead of aiming the arrow at Psyche's heart, he aimed it at his own. And in that moment, he felt something new awakening within him, something that made him forget his mother's command. It was love. Love for a mortal whose beauty touched the very depths of his divine being. Eros, blinded by his own feelings, decided to hide the truth from his mother. He whispered to her that he had fulfilled her will, but Psyche's heart remained untouched and her beauty unconquered. Aphrodite, believing her son, calmed down, but not for long. Meanwhile, the old man to whom Psyche's parents turned for advice predicted that the girl would suffer a fate more terrible than any mortal creature had ever known. She was to be given to the monster who lived on the mountaintop, a terrible and powerful creature that no one had ever seen, but about which people whispered with trepidation.
The parents, grief-stricken but forced to submit to fate, sent their daughter to the mountaintop, dressed in her wedding dress, as a sacrifice to the monster. Psyche, humbled and doomed, set out to meet her destiny. When she reached the top of the mountain, she was met not by a hideous monster, but by a magnificent palace built of glittering gold and precious stones.
The air was filled with sweet scents, and voices seemed to come from nowhere, welcoming her and offering her everything she could possibly desire. She was alone there, but she had never felt so safe. That night, as Psyche lay in her luxurious bed, she heard a soft whisper. "Do not be afraid, Psyche," the voice said, gentle and tender. "I am your husband. I am the one you must love. But never try to see my face. Never try to find out who I am. Otherwise, you will lose me forever." Thus began Psyche's days in this mysterious palace. Her husband came to her every night in total darkness, and they shared their love. Psyche felt his tenderness, his care, his passion. She fell in love with him, this mysterious stranger whose face she had never seen. But her sisters, who remained below, gave her no peace. They convinced her that her husband was a monster hiding his true form, and that she must learn the truth.
Filled with fear and curiosity, one night, while her husband was sleeping, Psyche lit a lamp. She carefully leaned over him, and in the light of the lamp, she saw her husband's face. It was not a monster, but the most beautiful of the gods, the young and powerful Eros. His golden hair fell over his shoulders. His lips were parted in a gentle, serene sleep. Psyche was struck by his beauty, but at that moment she inadvertently dropped a drop of hot oil from the lamp on the shoulder of the sleeping god. Eros awoke. He saw the lamp. He saw Psyche. He saw her betrayal. His eyes, usually full of love, were now filled with pain and disappointment. "You failed to trust me," he said, his voice like broken glass. "You chose curiosity over love. Now you have lost me forever." And with that he vanished, leaving Psyche alone in the empty palace, alone with her grief and remorse. Psyche was in despair. She had lost everything: love, happiness, her husband. She wandered the world trying to find him, but no one could help her. In her grief, she decided to turn to the one who was the cause of her suffering, Aphrodite. She came to the temple of Aphrodite, humbled and broken. "O great goddess," she begged, "forgive me. I was foolish. I was unwise. I did not know that you were worshipped and not me. I beg you, punish me, but let me return my love." Aphrodite, seeing Psyche, felt in her not only remorse, but also that very beauty that had irritated her so much. But now, seeing her suffering, she decided to put her to the test. "If you want to return your love," she said, "you must prove yourself worthy of it. You must perform 3 tasks that even the gods could not perform." The first test was about grain. Aphrodite ordered Psyche to sort through a huge pile of mixed grains, wheat, barley, millet, poppy, and separate them by type. It was a task that seemed impossible for one mortal. But at that moment, Psyche was helped by the ants. These small, hard-working creatures, seeing her despair, came to her aid. They worked all night, separating the grains with incredible speed and precision. In the morning, when Psyche arrived, she saw that all the work was done. The second test was about wool. Aphrodite ordered Psyche to collect golden wool from the wild, ferocious rams that lived in the forest. These rams were so dangerous that no one dared to approach them. But here too Psyche received help. The reeds that grew by the river advised her to wait until the rams had had their fill of grass and had gone to sleep. Then, quietly and carefully, Psyche was able to collect the golden fibers from their wool without exposing herself to danger. The third test was the most difficult. Aphrodite ordered Psyche to go to the kingdom of Hades, the underworld, and to get a vessel of water from the river Styx, the water that granted eternal youth. Psyche did not hesitate to set out on this dangerous journey. She descended into the kingdom of shadows, where she was met by Charon, the ferryman of souls, and Cerberus, the three-headed dog. She gave Charon a coin to cross the river and fed Cerberus honey to calm him. In the underworld, she found water, but as she was about to return, she was overcome by a desire to look at the contents of the vessel. She opened it, and from it came a dark, soporific mist that enveloped her, and she fell into a deep, sleepless sleep. When Eros finally learned that Psyche was in the underworld, he was horrified. He knew that her mother had driven her too far, that her trials had become too cruel. He overcame his own wounds and went in search of his beloved. He found her lying lifeless, and with his kiss, a kiss born of true love, he awoke her from her deathly sleep. When Eros, realizing that further trials would only harm Psyche, made a decision. He appeared before Zeus, the king of the gods, and demanded that Psyche be elevated to the rank of goddess. He confessed that he himself, not the monster, was her husband, and that he loved her with all his divine heart. Zeus, seeing the sincerity of his feelings, and perhaps wanting to appease his powerful daughter-in-law Aphrodite, agreed. Psyche was elevated to the rank of a goddess. Aphrodite, seeing that her son could not live without Psyche, and that she herself could not resist the will of Zeus, was forced to resign herself. She even prepared a wedding feast for Psyche, at which gods and mortals could see how love, born of jealousy and overcoming, finds its eternal triumph. Psyche, now immortal, was reunited with her beloved Eros. Their love, through trials, through pain, through fear, became even stronger, even deeper. They became a symbol of the fact that true love knows no boundaries, that it can overcome even death, that it can transform souls, making them immortal. Their story became a legend that lives on through the ages, reminding us of the power of trust, the importance of forgiveness, and that even in the darkest trials, love will always find its way to the light. And in this eternal union, Aphrodite, albeit reluctantly, acknowledged that true love, even if it is born from a mortal heart, can be as powerful as her own divine power.
The rays of the setting sun, like the last breaths of a dying day, painted the sky in soft shades of purple and gold. On the top of Olympus, where the echoes of eternity intertwined with the rustle of ambrosia, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, found her true, unfading radiance. Her story, which began in the seething foam of the sea, woven from the blood of Uranus and the wind, was now reaching its majestic finale. She had seen Eros, her son, and Psyche, the mortal who had become a goddess, find eternal happiness. Their union, born of jealousy and transformed into unwavering love, was a testament to the fact that even the most powerful forces can be tamed by true feeling. Aphrodite watched them with the slight, subtle melancholy that immortals feel when they see the transient beauty of mortal life, but also with a deep, quiet joy. Her gaze slid over the other gods. Eris, the god of war, whose passion had once raged in her arms, now found peace in battle, his fury channeled. Hephaestus, her husband, continued to create in his forge, his hands calloused from labor, now crafting not only weapons, but jewelry full of unspoken tenderness, a kind of silent adoration of her beauty. He had learned to love her as he knew how, through craftsmanship, through creating perfection that mirrored her own. Aphrodite was not just a goddess. She was the essence of desire, the pulse of life that makes flowers bloom, birds sing, and hearts beat in unison. She was the force that awakens desires, that inspires poets, that makes mortals perform feats and gods forget their greatness. Her beauty was not static, but alive, changing, like the play of light on the surface of water, reflecting the endless sky. She remembered the birth of chaos, the primordial void where it all began. She remembered the fury of Uranus, the tyranny of Cronus, the bloody sacrifice that gave her life. She saw the birth of titans, the overthrow of fathers, the world taking shape. And in each of these eras, in each of these events, there was a share of her influence, the passion, the desire, the attraction that drove their actions. Her journey from the sea foam to the sacred shores of Cyprus, her meeting with the Horae, the goddesses of the seasons, who adorned her with flowers and songs, was only the beginning. The first lovers whose hearts she awakened were only echoes of the power she was to unleash. On Olympus, amid the thunder of Zeus and the wisdom of Hera, she took her place. The union with Hephaestus, a marriage that seemed impossible, became part of her path. He taught her patience, showed her that love can be not only a raging flame, but also a quiet, steady light. And her presence, her beauty, softened the stern heart of the blacksmith god, allowing him to see in her not only an ideal, but a sentient being. The stories of Adonis and Pygmalion were but reflections of her influence on the mortal world. Adonis, whose beauty was as brilliant as it was fragile, whose love for her was as pure as it was doomed. His death, marred by the treachery of Ares, but redeemed by the eternal cycle of return, was a bittersweet reminder of the fragility of life and the strength to resist even oblivion. And Pygmalion, whose passion for the living stone, Galatea, was proof that love born from a pure heart can work miracles, transforming not only matter, but reality itself. Psyche, a mortal whose beauty defied the divine order itself, became her most important disciple. Through jealousy, through trials, through pain, she learned the true nature of love, one that demands trust, forgiveness, and absolute surrender. Her transformation into a goddess, her eternal union with Eros, was the triumph of this power. Proof that love is not just passion, but the path to the immortality of the soul. Now, as the sun set, Aphrodite felt calm. Her influence permeated all things, from the twinkling stars to the deepest trench of the ocean. She was not just a goddess of beauty, she was the embodiment of everything that makes life beautiful, desirable, meaningful. She was the whisper of the wind that caresses the skin, the scent of flowers that intoxicates the soul, the thrill of the heart that makes life possible. Her gaze, the color of a deep, serene sea, looked beyond the horizon, where the world was sinking into the soft embrace of night. The sounds of Olympus grew quieter, as if a majestic choir was dying down, giving way to a peaceful silence. Golden light refracted through emerald waves, carrying with it the last echoes of the day. Aphrodite felt a weariness unknown to the gods, but familiar to mortals, wash over her. It was not weakness, but rather a deep satisfaction, the knowledge that her mission had been accomplished. The world she had helped create was full of beauty, passion, love, and, of course, the sadness that made these feelings so precious. She closed her eyes, feeling her divine essence dissolving into a soft, lulling peace. The warmth of her body, like the last rays of the sun, spread around, filling the space with a gentle, soothing light. The scents of night flowers, sweet and intoxicating, enveloped her, carrying her away from the bustle of the day. In this quiet, serene moment, Aphrodite, the symbol of eternal love, beauty, and passion, was falling asleep. A sleep filled with echoes of ancient myths, whispers of eternity, and the promise of a new dawn. A sleep that would take her far, beyond consciousness, to a realm of peace where even goddesses can find peace. And in this immersion, in this soft fading, lay the secret of her unfading radiance, the ability to give life, to awaken feelings, and finally to retreat into the arms of sleep, leaving the world filled with reflections of her eternal beauty. May this night be as peaceful and beautiful for you as the goddess herself, whose image came to life in this story. Sleep peacefully.